Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, listener. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. On tonight's edition, we invite you to leave behind your safe reality and descend with us into the frightening depths of the most terrifying imaginations with two audio adaptations of frightening fiction about grim good deeds and specific stipulations. I'm your host, Steve Taylor, and tonight I'll be your guide as we traverse the dimly lit corridors of your darkest dreams. Joining us tonight to help bring to life the frightening fiction of Michael Castillo and WorldAwayTweedy are voice talents Nick Goroff, Erik Peabody, Kyle Stroud, Otis Jiry, Olivia Steele, Melissa Medina, and myself, Steve Taylor. Now, get your ticket ready, take your seat in our theater of the minds, and brace yourself. It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Our first tale this evening is written by Michael Castillo and performed by Nick Goroff, Erik Peabody, Kyle Stroud, and Otis Jiry. When their car breaks down along a lonely country road, a couple is offered help by a pair of strangers driving by. The two parties soon realize that not everything is what it seems, and soon things take a much more sinister turn. Now, without further ado, I present to you Passenger.
It's getting dark, and I can barely keep my eyes focused on the road. It seems like this old blue sedan has been on the road for what feels like hours now. I'm not sure how I got turned around so quickly, but I start to feel lost. The further I drive, the more the road seems to go on forever. I look over to my wife, and her eyes are fixated straight ahead on the road. She's giving me the silent treatment and hasn't said a word since we left. I ignore her and reach over to fumble with the radio knobs. Some local news comes on, but I change it to something more upbeat and catchier. The air is dense and cloudy. It won't be long now before the sun sets. We get off the interstate and start traveling down some back roads. I know a shortcut, if I remember correctly. It has just been a while since I've been down these old country roads. The further we drive, the fewer houses we start to see, until it's mostly just open road and country air. I sit back and try to enjoy the drive when all of a sudden the car starts to sputter and the lights dim. A dead battery, I think to myself, and slowly pull over to the side as the car dies out. "Stay in the car, hun," I tell her while checking under the hood. My wife remains calm and silent as I pop the hood and get out. It seems like a dead battery to me, for sure. I close the hood and catch my wife's pale blue eyes staring back at me. Her milky complexion is brought out even more by her tousled raven black hair. Making my way back to the driver's seat, the realization hits me that I didn't bring a phone, and my wife's phone isn't charged. There is nothing to do now but wait it out. About an hour passes, and the first pair of headlights can be seen coming up the road in front of us. I get out and frantically wave my arms, hoping to flag them down. It's dark now, and the country surroundings have taken on a much more eerie atmosphere. Miles of trees and a lonely road blanketed by darkness make for an unsettling feeling. The headlights are fast approaching. They belong to a beat-up old pickup truck. I quickly jump out of the way as the truck darts past me, nearly hitting me. The brakes screech like a banshee in the night as the truck whips around and idles. "Hey!" I angrily shout, still catching my breath from the near miss. The truck slowly starts to creep towards us. Its lights blind me for a second before they go dim. The interior lights come on as the driver's side door creaks open, illuminating two figures sitting in the front. A couple of good old boys, traveling the back roads on a late night. The driver gets out and slowly makes his way over to our car. A tall, well-built gentleman wearing a mechanic's shirt, torn jeans, and a red trucker's cap walks over. The other passenger stays in the truck, his face briefly illuminated as he lights up a cigarette. "Stay in the car, hon," I whisper to my wife while I adjust my eyeglasses and walk over to greet the stranger.
"You folks doing all right?"
I say. "The car died about an hour ago." I pop the hood open for him to take a look. Dead battery, I think.
"Yeah, we can give you a jump. That's not a problem."
The scruffy gentleman nods as he walks over to the car and peeks under the hood. He pulls out a small flashlight and shines it over the engine compartment. I immediately notice what looks like blood specks splattered across the lens of the flashlight. He glances over at me, and I can tell he knows that it makes me uncomfortable because he wipes it clean using his shirt. My eyes scan his shirt and notice small traces of blood splattered on his sleeve.
"It ain't my blood.
His eyes lock on mine.
It's deer blood. My buddy and I have been hunting all day."
He slams the hood down and looks straight ahead at my wife sitting in the passenger seat. He shines his flashlight at me and smiles.
"Hang tight. I'll grab the jumper cables."
"Not a problem," I say as I try to hide how uncomfortable the man makes me. He starts walking past the car and abruptly stops by the driver's side, shining his flashlight into the car. Rays of blinding, battery-powered luminance cascade over my wife and slowly spill over to the back seat. My wife remains calm and silent as always. He stares into the back seat for a second, and then peers over at my wife again. The uncomfortable feeling from before now starts to swell into panic as I stare at the man. Saying nothing, he lowers the flashlight and continues to walk over to his truck. My body feels as tense as a bowstring with apprehension as I watch the man swing the rusty door open and climb in. Wasting no time, I quickly get inside the car and lock the doors. No other cars have driven by this entire time, and I'm starting to get a really bad feeling about the two men. From the driver's seat, I can see them discussing something with each other. It's difficult to make out anything other than shadows in the dark at this hour. Even with the moon beaming down, the charcoal sky seems to effortlessly swallow up any existing light. The two men appear to be arguing about something before pointing towards my direction. Fear starts to take over the longer I watch them, contemplating what must surely be malicious intent. A few minutes pass and the driver's door swings open again. The passenger fumbles with his phone, causing an instant burst of glowing light that illuminates the darkened truck. I catch a brief glimpse of the young man before he holds the phone over his ear. His arms wave in a frantic motion as the driver slowly draws closer to me. My mind starts racing. What are they up to? He said it was deer blood, but how do I know that? Why is the other guy on the phone? Why the hell have there not been any other cars going by? My eyes nervously look around as I try to start the car up again. Nothing. It's still dead. Foolish of me to hope otherwise. The sound of the man's boots scraping across the loose gravel sends a shiver down my spine, knowing that he'll be upon me at any second. I try one more time. The anticipation has me tied up in knots. I punch the steering wheel as hard as I can out of frustration. From my peripheral vision, I can now see the man standing attentively at my window. He taps on my door to get my attention, so I crack the window open just enough to hear what he has to say.
Hey, listen. No luck on them jumper cables. Seems I was, mistaken. I must have taken them out of the truck or something. My buddy over there is calling a friend of ours to swing by and lend a hand. Won't be but a few minutes.
You know what? It's okay, I say, quickly trying to think of something to make him go away. We've already called a tow truck. It's on the way. Sorry to bother you, but thanks for everything, though. I roll the window back up and proceed to nervously fidget around with the dashboard. I glance over at his truck and I can see the other man on the phone with somebody. His door swings open and he proceeds to get out while motioning towards our car.
Come on. Just get out of the car.
He suddenly starts to fumble with the door handle, trying to get it open. Fear surges through my body, confirming my suspicion of the pair. My wife remains calm and silent as if nothing is happening. The other guy rushes over to help his friend, and within seconds, they both are pulling at the door handle. They violently shake the door and start yelling, demanding for me to come out. In full panic mode, my mind is racing 100 miles an hour. I know it won't be long before they break the door and pull me outside. Terrified, I frantically try to start the car while blaring the horn as hard as I can. Why is this happening? What do they want? I think to myself. Have they just been driving around these pitch-black back roads just waiting for an opportunity like this? Oh, God. Have they done this before? And if so, how many times? Everything starts spinning as I try to drown out the sound of the two men desperately trying to get in. I look up and, in the distance, I can see a pair of headlights fast approaching towards me. For a split second, a sense of relief washes over me until I start thinking if this is the other car that they called to help them earlier. If there are more of them, surely there will be no stopping them from breaking into the car. The headlights get closer, and the two men suddenly stop and take a few steps away from the car. My nerves are wound up like a jack-in-the-box at this point. I hold my breath anxiously, awaiting what is going to happen next. I stare at the oncoming headlights harder than I have ever stared at anything else in my life. The headlights cut through the darkness with ease, and within seconds the car comes to a rest behind that old pickup truck. The light is blinding, but I can faintly make out what looks like a police cruiser. I immediately rejoice at the sight of the car pulling up and briefly flashing its police lights. Salvation, I think to myself. The two men mumble something inaudible to me, then slowly start to walk over to the police car. Thank goodness, I remark as I glance over at my wife. She doesn't say a word. The officer cautiously opens his door and steps outside. As the two men walk over to the officer, a feeling of immense dread comes over me because I know I have to warn the officer of how dangerous these two are before they attack him. With my heart pounding like a drum out of my chest, I hastily roll the window down and begin trying to warn the officer. The men abruptly stop and look back in my direction with a confused look. I can see the officer slow his pace toward the two and place his hand on his holster. I watch attentively as the two men begin to talk to the officer while pointing in my direction. The officer nods his head and walks over towards me. He quickly draws his gun and shines his flashlight directly on me. I recoil away from the blinding light as my mind wanders in confusion. Why the hell is he pointing a gun at me? I ask myself.
Step out of the car slowly with your hands I can see them, sir.
He shines the light on my wife and then back to me. He holds the flashlight on me with an unwavering focus that suggests he's no rookie out on patrol. I reluctantly comply and decide to do what he asks of me. Having a loaded gun pointed at my head obliges me to acquiesce and not rebel against his orders. I fiercely try to plead my case with the grizzled officer, but my words seem to fall on deaf ears. Wild-eyed and frozen in shock, my body struggles to get out of the car and make sense out of any of this right now. I am immediately slammed onto the front hood of my car and handcuffed. The wrists jerk reluctantly as he tightens the restraints and begins a string of interrogative questions. I drown his voice out. It becomes white noise to me. I step forward and focus my attention on my darling wife and her wooden stare in the passenger seat. She remains just as calm and silent as ever while the officer continues to question me. In all of the confusion, I fail to notice another officer step out of the police car and join his partner. The other officer walks around my car and focuses his flashlight on my wife. The light illuminates her porcelain pale skin as it traces across her face in the pitch-black night. He then proceeds to flood the back seat with light, and I can see that he's quickly taken aback by what he sees as soon as the light hits. The way he's so easily startled. He must be a rookie.
I got something here, sir.
The rookie cop exclaims as he opens the door. I can see him reaching in and starting to rummage through the back seat. Slowly, he lifts his head while holding something tightly in his hands. I hold my breath while my eyes burn through the darkness to see what he pulls out.
What have you got there, rookie?
I've got a body in the back seat and this jumpsuit here.
He holds up a white jumpsuit.
He's our guy. That's the same white jumper the patients wear at that mental institution, a couple of towns over.
The officer presses my head against the hood.
Sick son of a bitch killed these poor folks and stole their car.
Jesus, did you see the woman in the front seat? Why the hell would he have her body just propped up like that, sir?
I don't know, son. But where he's going, he'll have all the time in the world to explain.
Within seconds, more police show up, and the air instantly fills with police chatter and radio static. The hypnotic glow of the flashing red and blue lights dances across my face, and for a split second, I lose myself in their incandescence. I take one last look at my darling passenger. She played her part, and for a brief moment, she felt like home to me. I smile and see that she is just the way I left her, pale face and lifeless, forever my passenger.
I hope you enjoyed Passenger, as written by Michael Castillo and performed by Nick Goroff, Erik Peabody, Kyle Stroud, and Otis Jiry. Our second tale of the evening is written by WorldAwayTweedy and performed by Olivia Steele, featuring myself, Steve Taylor, Nick Goroff, Melissa Medina, and Erik Peabody. Normally, when you get hired on at an establishment, there is a manual or set of standards and rules to adhere by. This story focuses on the unwritten ones and how important they are to our world as we know it. Now, without further ado, I present to you, there is a customer none of us are allowed to serve.
I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has, of course, been changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner, off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things aren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I'm aware you probably aren't actually asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is fucking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $50 an hour. And that hourly rate is due to one single, solitary reason. No matter what anyone tells you. Because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I'd worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules like some areas in the restaurant need to be spotless at all times, others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly. But not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't actually like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghosts rules extended to the cooks as well. If you were somehow secretly celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched, to the occasion quite well. You want intentional, pinpoint precision mediocrity? You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch, brought them at medium speed with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day, I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse's mouth, more of a skeptical side eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills.
Said it on your first date, you gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you better be damn well perfect. High expectations here.
I made a face. Right, high expectations.
You think I'm joking?
No, ma'am, I guess why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems fair? Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah! She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look.
Look, I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself.
I'm sorry?
I am your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure. But you should be aware there is plenty more going on here than just you and this diner.
She glanced down at her watch, then sighed.
I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So, the Cole's notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, and without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul, a week's worth of pay on the house.
The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun, my coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I'd found a place to park the failures of my life. A place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s it seemed, a reasonably calm smile. Normal-looking dude. I started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately, I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch. Enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin.
Important rules,
she said. What?
You remember our chat about rules? Well, this is the most important one, okay?
Okay.
That man over there in the corner?
She motioned to the man who'd caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together. Coy smile across his face.
You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him.
But he's a customer? Her hold intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me.
I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table and you don't talk to him. You can look at him, you can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that, but you do not approach him and you do not take his order.
Or...
It's different every time, bud. It ain't pretty.
A sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. I watched him from the short distance I'd been afforded. It was not hard to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious. Mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It felt nice to look up to the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I tried to squeak in the odd question to my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with, I don't know, and if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day, Boss Lady fell incredibly ill. My coworkers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, the other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by a foundational curiosity that I just couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir? What brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. Clever. "I said, what brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me. The man sounded exactly how he looked.
"I'm sorry, dear,"
he said.
"I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over here and ask me again?"
Nope. I was good.
And I don't mean to be rude about the service, but it feels like no one's taken my order for quite some time now.
I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was just there, he's here and he's gone, and the odd when we really needed to say it. I feel really weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right, in the moment, to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said,
Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss if you have a few.
The big boss? Sure. Yeah, coming. Just, if you don't mind me asking, who is... She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me. Questions equals generally bad. Thank you for the reminder, ma'am. We maneuvered to a back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in, the aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes, papers, and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted, like a deer to headlights. No concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then he turned to Melanie.
How long she been here?
He asked her in his gruff western drawl.
6 months,
she said.
You trust her?
I trust her, yes.
He let his eyebrows say, if you say so, then went on with it.
All right, so apparently you had a visit from the wandering man last week. You,
he said, motioning to Melanie,
were out, but you...
Attention now shifted to me.
Weren't. Give me the lowdown.
The wandering man? The agent caught the confusion in my eyes.
Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?
He said to Melanie.
Sir, I know it sounds weird,
she said,
but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity. Like, maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the better.
Wandering man.
The agent cut her off.
Is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your little fine establishment, or should I say the state's fine little establishment?
I'm sorry? I asked.
That's correct, the state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation. The Wandering Man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. At the time, he'd just walk the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all hunky-dory. A little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things. Grisly things. Sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things. Grisly things.
I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? Have you guys, taken him in for... I almost wanted to cut off my own stupid question, but he ran with it.
Nope, not because we don't wanna, but rather because it might not be safe.
The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture.
We have reason to believe that he's a visitor,
he said. I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers, spaced out and seated amongst the eatery, were now just a glaring reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end-of-the-month window the wandering man was set to arrive in. When he'd appeared, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into their notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month of working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it absolutely made no sense to me. Now, 7 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here, and it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, not because of the pay. I'm not actually sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now. The ones who understood the vague terms of the situation, just as Melanie, I, and all former employees did, stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener. Mega keener. He'd bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role, for a guy his young age, was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things about this diner that are strange, rules you will have to follow and not think about, rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here, I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the wandering man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till, and if we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I first started. He recoiled in surprise. "Remember that little chat about rules we just had?" I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead with, what I believed at the time, no real reason to be here. And I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him, don't talk to him, pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he was holding in his left hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for.
"Just doing garbage duty, ma'am,"
he said.
"But understood."
And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception.
"Officers,"
he said.
"if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table and ask them."
The agents around the room reacted mainly with snickers.
"Seriously, If you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all. Truly.
Even more laughs, but no one bit. And yet he continued, pointedly.
I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you.
As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered through the diner's side door, a door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast, and yet it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly, as if there was a moment, a single, solitary second where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway and adopting a completely new demeanor. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man.
Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him ring something up for you. What are you?
And then Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire cat wide. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering with what seemed to be an undeniable excitement. The man started getting up from the table, and then, immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the Wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone, nonsensical agent speak that had been seared into my memory forever.
Alert level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised.
And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commute home, or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home, back from wherever he'd been taken. The debrief with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. Where was he taken to? Answered with, he's gone now. With a perpetual dagger in my soul now. I had only the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be even more watchful, even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diner. No exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo that they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door, in the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift. I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then, he was right there, standing in front of me. And I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled.
Don't worry. I have my own little set of rules I play by,
he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now.
I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species.
Please just go.
I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right?
I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not. He laughed.
The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, This little charade I'm playing. It is just so unbelievably fun.
Please don't kill me, please.
You truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month, maybe 2 this time.
A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes.
I'll come back with a new game.
And then he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in an almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, "The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there really is nowhere else to run. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, by open sky. Someone could drop in any time."
I hope you enjoyed There Is a Customer None of Us Are Allowed to Serve, as written by WorldAwayTweedy and performed by Olivia Steele, featuring myself, Steve Taylor, Nick Goroff, Melissa Medina, and Erik Peabody. This tale was brought to us by an old trusted friend, the No Sleep subreddit. WorldAwayTweedy's work, along with many others, can be found right here on this forum. Well, on to the shows. Longtime resident Otis Jiry has his very own show here on our network, Scary Stories Told in the Dark, which you can hear every Sunday night. We also have Erik Peabody's Horror Hill, a podcast dedicated to some of our deeper and darker tales. We hope you check him out. And Drew Blood's Dark Tales airs Fridays, featuring some southern down-home horror. And don't forget to check out The Fear from the Heartland archives, featuring more than 120 episodes. Well, friends, our weekly descent into the depths has just about come to a close. But before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us for tonight, and remind you to take a moment to stop by our iTunes page and leave Chilling Tales for Dark Nights a 5-star review and a kind word, and follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can find an archive of our work going back to 2012. And consider signing up as a patron at our website, chillingtalesfordarknights.com, to show your support and get all of our content ad-free. I'm your host of the evening, Steve Taylor, and it's been a pleasure. Tune in again next week, when we once again turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listener. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.